BBC TV18, celebrating 15 years of leadership.
Welcome back to Indianomics. We have been speaking with the Chief Economist at the World Bank, our own Dr. Kaushik Basu. Well, Dr. Basu, let me come to China. The World Bank itself has marked down its growth only slightly. Actually, IMF and a whole host of private economists are a little more skeptical about Chinese growth. But the bigger question everyone has is, will China manage without a major crisis in its banking and shadow banking sector? Your thoughts?
I think that's the most likely outcome, that China will do a soft correction of its growth rate, coming down from the current 7.4% to 6.9, 6.8%. IMF, I know, is forecasting even lower than what we are forecasting. But this movement, it should be able to do smoothly. But does that mean it's zero risk of a turbulence? No. China's debt is large, so as the Chinese government and the People's Bank are aware of that, they will try to make corrections to this. But correcting a debt is a very difficult exercise, and there is no sort of rule book of how you do it right. It's not an engineering exercise. So there is a small risk that this will cause a turbulence in the economy, some slowdown in growth which will pick up again. But the medium-term prognosis is, as you see in our global economic prospects, that China will be able to handle it well, and its growth will slow down, but it will slow down slowly, and that is what you want to happen to China.
Fair point. I'll come to the impact on commodities in a bit. But Dr. Basu, now the comparison with India. The IMF thinks India will overtake China's pace of growth in 2016. The World Bank says it is in 2017. Well, are you a little more skeptical of India's growth?
No, but let me tell you, our forecast is that that's going to happen in 2017, and IMF is forecasting that will happen in 2016. And if you look at IMF and our forecast on India, it's roughly the same. In fact, in 2016, we are more optimistic on India than IMF. IMF is a bit more pessimistic than us on China. And so to that extent, IMF is expecting the crossover to take place on 2016. We are expecting it to take place on 2017. But, you know, this is just very close to each other's forecast on what's going to happen. There is going to be a crossover sooner or later, and pretty close to each other. And that seems very well worked out. I mean, the global scenario is such, and you have to remember that China has had 30 years of phenomenal growth. So for China to go down to 6.9% as we are forecasting, or to go down to 6.5 or 6.4 as the IMF is forecasting, it's still very handsome growth, coming on the heels of a 30-year period of very rapid growth. For India, it is a slow pickup from the current situation of 5.5 or so to about 7% in 2017. And this is entirely within the realm of what is possible for India. In the medium term, actually, India should go even higher than that.
Okay. I actually like your optimistic forecast of India. But Dr. Basu, for those of us who are within India, things don't really look so rosy. If you looked at the last IIP Index of Industrial Output, it's so anemic that index is exactly where it was in 2011. The third quarter results of most companies is showing hardly any top-line growth. When is India's inflection point, and where, which sector will it come from?
Yeah. So industry is India's stumbling block. I mean, historically, the services sector did very well. Industry and manufacturing has remained small, and embarrassingly small for a country at India's stage of development. And that is the sector that we are all looking at. Now, it is true that what you have seen thus far is very small growth. After all, we know India's growth picked up massively in 2005. It had 3 years of phenomenal growth. But the global crisis hit, India slowed down a little bit. Even now, 5.5, frankly, again, in the global landscape is not bad. But India needs to pick up more. Where will it come from? Even if you don't see it right now, there are two points where you want the Indian government, Indian policymakers to lay stress. One is India needs better infrastructure, and India needs a much more efficient bureaucratic machinery so that new businesses, even self-employed, ordinary small enterprises can do better. You are seeing effort to correct both these. In fact, the infrastructure, I'm very optimistic that it will happen easily and quick. Bureaucracy, transactions cost, the ease of doing business, these are harder. But to the extent that moves are being made towards these changes, it's hopeful. And I agree that right now you're not seeing those shoots in the industrial sector, the green shoots. But there is so much policy talk and directed effort being given to the ease of doing business and better infrastructure that we do expect that growth will pick up. Now, if you read the global economic prospects carefully, it will say that if the reform momentum is kept up, this will happen. We are expecting the reform momentum to be kept up, but, there is politics involved. There are important changes that will happen over the next 2 months. There's a budget coming up. There is a GST on which a lot depends, really. So if these things happen, growth will pick up, and India should be able to get back actually to the high growth that India did see from 2005 to 2008 is once again possible. It will take a couple of years to get there.
No, Dr. Basu, let me dwell on the infrastructure bit a little more. The private sector infrastructure companies' balance sheet is completely broken. Now, the government would like to invest in physical infrastructure to pull in private investments. But will foreign investors, rating agencies, entities where you are, the World Bank, take kindly to a hike in fiscal deficit from India?
The outside observers probably won't take kindly, and how they take is important. So to that extent, the government has to watch that. Now, here is my view. Given India's situation today, it can afford to use some of the fiscal space it had created over the last 2 years. So if its deficit does not come down to 4.1% or 4%, I don't think this year, frankly, it's going to be a disaster. Having said that, let me make it very clear, I'm not encouraging the Indian government to go that way, because it will be picked up as signals by observers. I don't think it will be the right thing to do for the observers, but they will do that. And to that extent, it is worthwhile for the government to continue on the path of fiscal tightening, and that will give it space 1-2 years down the road to go for a fiscal expansion should the need arise. And the government should indeed focus on investment and spend money on investment, and that will put some pressure on the fiscal deficit. But doing that for the reason of investment, which will increase productivity in the country, is worthwhile.
Okay, yeah, I mean, the fiscal deficit has been the creator of a huge inflation problem, and you know how terrible the inflation problem has been in the last 5 years, double digits for the most part when you were here. It's now getting to single digits for the past 5 months. Do you think India has managed to rein in inflation for good?
We cannot relax, but I think on inflation we are moving into a better phase, at least for a few years. And the main reason for that is, yes, the government and the Reserve Bank, they have been trying to do this, but they've been trying to do this for 5 years, really. You are keeping interest rates elevated. You are trying to gradually bring down the fiscal deficit. It was not getting enough bite. What's happened over the last 6-7 months that inflation has come down? I think it is this persistent effort on the part of the Reserve Bank and the Ministry of Finance, coupled with something very important: global commodities and oil price. These have helped. And to the extent that we expect, and I do actually personally believe that oil prices will remain low to moderate very likely over the next 2 years and maybe even longer, the pressure on prices will be low. So to that extent, India's inflation problem is, at least over the next 2 years, it is going to be minimal. that creates a window of opportunity for the government to be more energetic and actually push on other fronts. So this commodity price softening is a great opportunity for India. It is helping the country with inflation being brought down and creating space for reforms, and that space has to be utilized by the policymakers in New Delhi.
Yes, fair point. But on the commodity issue itself, do you think the Reserve Bank and the Indian policymakers can be reasonably sure that 2015 will be a bear year for commodities? What's your take, considering that you are seeing some slowdown in China and Eurozone? Do you fear commodity prices may even rise before 2015 ends?
I expect oil to remain low because I believe that the drop in oil prices, it's overshot a little bit. It's gone down more than where it will be. But the movement took place not because of demand. Demand is extremely volatile. It can go up and come down. But because there has been a flattening of supply. Around $55 to $75, there has been a flattening of supply. And the reason is shale supply kicks in somewhere between $55 and $75. So for demand fluctuating within this region, the price will remain there because shale is ready to kick in and will kick in to the extent that is needed as long as the demand remains in this zone. For that reason, I expect oil price to remain low. And for India, actually, that is more important than anything else. There is expectation that the current account deficit, and I lived with that during my entire period in India, is for the first time, this is probably going to flip the other way around, and India may get a current account surplus. All this is creating a huge window of opportunity for the country, and it should go full throttle at it at this point of time.
All right, Dr. Basu, I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much for joining me today. Well, the key takeaways, largely crude will not go above that $55, $75 mark. We could take that even if we don't have sub $50. Sub 75 should be very helpful both for the fisc and for the current account deficit. But more importantly, Dr. Basu and the World Bank very confident that growth in India will pick up in 2015 and more importantly, cross the Chinese space, if not in 2016, at least in 2017. That's it from Dr. Basu. Thanks for watching this edition of Indianomics.